got Hale Center. Host, are your lights turned out? Or we're just having camera issues? Good morning. I'm looking at posts and they're in the dark. I think they're there. I can see motion, but it's all dark. Unless I have a camera issue or what. Okay. I can see him moving around too. Okay, I'll give it a try. Hey, Post, turn the lights on in your room. Can y'all hear me? Somebody respond.
Tahoka can.
Yeah.
What? We're not muted.
There's some issue with lights and Post, I think it is. I can see Tahoka, I can see Hale Center. Don't look like they're wide awake. As long as Post can hear me, we can carry on, but I don't know what the story is with their camera, or whether you just have your lights out or something. I'm getting no light. Sometimes that'll happen here, and if you hit the thing on the camera that does a close-up and then backs out again, it will adjust. But you have to do that from the front of the room. At any rate, we're recording this, so if anyone has trouble hearing or seeing. We left off last time talking about the British pulling out of Boston. And I said they'd be back, and of course they will be back. That all happened in March of 1776. They're going to be back in July. Right about the time that the Continental Congress approves the Declaration of Independence. That's on the 4th of July. 2 days before that, the British attacked Staten Island. They've landed in Long Island, Staten Island, all in the New York area. They're all part of New York City nowadays, with 32,000 men. All Washington has is about 19,000, and there you go. Good morning, Post. Well done. And here we all thought you were sitting in the darkness and holding hands or something. Ah, okay. So they're led by General Howe, and they're going to play a tap dance all around that area. I got to get somewhere put these slides up here in a second. Of course, by this time everybody knows that Thomas Gage got fired. Come on, machine. He got fired right after Bunker Hill. So it's Admiral, or not Admiral, but General William Howe. It gets confusing because Admiral Richard Howe, his big brother, is senior to him, and he's kind of in charge of everything. But William Howe is the man in charge on the land. Let's move on up there. There he is, Commander-in-Chief of British forces in North America. I think we talked about different advantages and disadvantages of both sides. We talked about the arming of Dorchester Heights. There was just a tap dance through this whole area, and George Washington seems to be kind of one step ahead of the British at all times. At one point, the British tried to go around him, and try and surround his army. One person that helped save the day is Henry Knox, who put some cannons on this little island called Governor's Island. It's still there, by the way. It's a military installation, or maybe a park now. It was a military installation when I was your age, because I was there as the guest of the commanding general at one point when I was a kid. My family was. But anyway, George Washington's going to go all the way off this island. Let's see if I can find a good map there. He's going to cross the Hudson River and eventually work his way into New Jersey to get away. Some generals functioned pretty well for Washington, not all of them, but one of the really good ones was a general by the name of John Sullivan, who held the British off to give Washington a chance to get away, and was eventually captured by the British. There's other maps of the same thing, and there, got this memorized. It's kind of hard to figure out, but that's Washington's retreat into New Jersey, out of New York into New Jersey, and for the rest of that year, from October through December of 1775, he's going to be moving as much as he can, and the British are going to try and chase him down, and his men will stand and shoot maybe one time before they run, because they're just not all that well trained yet. They will learn. He manages somehow to keep them together, which was probably like herding cats at the beginning. Eventually, he's going to be pressed by the British, and he's going to move south to the southern part of New Jersey, and he's going to go across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. Let's see if I can. No, these are later battles. At any rate, while he's busy doing that, in 1776, Thomas Paine's going to write another series of letters called The Crisis, or The American Crisis. They'll publish them in December of 1776, on the 19th. Now Washington sets up camp in Pennsylvania right across the Delaware River from New Jersey. And the British decide to slow down. It's getting late in the year. The weather's getting colder. And they choose not to go across the Delaware to chase after Washington. But they will put outposts to keep an eye on him. And one of those outposts is in a little place called Trenton. Let me see if I can find. Okay, there's a schematic of it anyway. You can see Washington's main group of troops over near a place called McConkey's Ferry in Pennsylvania. And down in a little town called Trenton, you see it in the lower right-hand corner of this map, there's a force of something over 1,000 German troops they're mercenaries fighting on behalf of the British. We call them, in general, we call them the Hessians, That's named after one place in Germany, Hesse, but actually they weren't all from that place. Some of them are from Saxony, some of them are from Hanover. There were about 30,000 of them altogether involved in the war. On Christmas Day, Washington gets news, or his generals get news, that the Hessians' defensive position isn't really very secure because they're celebrating Christmas, and the Germans like to drink a little bit of beer and schnapps and things like that at Christmas time. And General Greene and General Sullivan, who's already been released by the British, he was exchanged for a British officer that was captured. They go to Washington and say, hey, this is an opportunity, General, to strike back. And they persuade Washington to allow them to cross the Delaware again and to do what you call a double enfilade of Trenton, approach Trenton from two different sides. And they do that on the 26th of December, and they catch the Germans recovering from heavy drinking and things like that, not keeping guard very well. They capture some German weapons, and then they just go about capturing 1,000 German prisoners. The overall total in the battle, we lost 3 Americans killed, 6 wounded. They killed 22 Hessians, wounded 98, and they captured about 1,000 of them and took all their weapons, all their gunpowder, and all their artillery. That was the first kind of a victory. It wasn't a huge victory that George Washington had in this war. They're going to go back south of the Delaware River again. That's a famous painting on that slide of Washington crossing the Delaware, and I seriously doubt that it looked like that when he crossed the Delaware, because it was snowing and sleeting and pretty miserable weather, and he was probably covered up with a tarp or something on the way over to keep dry. The 3 generals that you see there, they'll all become generals anyway. The top one on the left is Nathaniel Greene, called the Fighting Quaker. On the right is General Sullivan, and down below is Henry Knox, the guy that brought the guns and put them up on the top of the high ground overlooking Boston, which led the British to have to withdraw from Boston. So they're the 3 big principles in this. Henry Knox is pretty happy because he got some extra cannon to add to the cannon he already had. Then goes the winter. Everything freezes. The British, by the way, Washington, when he got Trenton, he sent some men up to Princeton and places like that for a quick attack on the British. He chased them out briefly, but they couldn't stay in Princeton. So they withdrew back down to Pennsylvania. There's where Trenton is on the overall map of the northern part of the Revolutionary War. Okay, let's talk about this. We don't need to look at that slide right now. We'll flip off of it. Somebody remind me when we need to go back, point at me or something. But here's the deal. Early the next year, or over the winter, while they're wintering, General Howe, General Clinton, his second in command, I think General Cornwallis was there by then, sit down, and General Burgoyne as well. They sit down and try and figure out some kind of a strategy to wrap up all of the Americans and end the war quickly. And they come up with a strategy. I think part of it was General Burgoyne's idea. General Burgoyne had influence in England. I think he wrote a letter to Lord Germain. I don't know if I have a picture of Lord Germain. Let me see if I can figure a picture of him. Way down here somewhere. No, I don't have him on that particular set of slides, I guess. I thought I did. There's General John, here, let me put this up for you. This is John Sullivan, the guy that was captured by the British and then exchanged, and later he fights at Trenton and a number of other battles. Where's Germain? Where's Germain? There he is, George Germain. The first Viscount Sackville. He is running the war in America from England. Imagine, no radios, no telegrams, no fast-moving messages, but he's going to remotely control the war. He's going to micromanage the war, which is probably one of the reasons that we won. In fact, when he was in the military himself, he was kicked out of the military, just unfit to serve in any military capacity, whatever, but through politics and all that, he ends up in charge of the whole thing in America, which was probably a godsend for us. So let's look back up at this. What's going to happen? They're going to decide on a three-pronged attack. They're going to send General Burgoyne way up to the St. Lawrence River, and he's going to come down the St. Lawrence River, then go down Lake Champlain. We've talked about that before when we talked about Crown Point and Saratoga, down to a place called Albany, which is the capital of New York, down to the Hudson River, and they were going to cut all of that northern part of the colonies off. General Clinton was going to stay in New York, and if called upon, would come out of New York and go up to help General Burgoyne. And General Howe, the senior general, was going all the way down to the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, going to sail all the way to the top end of the Chesapeake Bay, land in Maryland, and fight his way up to Philadelphia and try and capture the Continental Congress. And then he also would continue north to help out General Clinton and General Burgoyne. Howe sets sail first because it's going to take him longest to get there. He's going to land a force of 13,000 English soldiers and 5,000 German soldiers, pretty close to a place that's now called Elkton, Maryland. Back then it was called Head of Elk. It's at the head of a little river called the Elk River. He would have liked to have landed closer to Philadelphia, but his guess was that Washington had the shoreline up near Philadelphia pretty well protected. So he landed a little bit further south. And he's going to fight in a place called Brandywine. He's going to bump into Washington. Washington comes out of Philadelphia to defend Philadelphia and meets Howe at Brandywine and almost gets whipped, almost gets captured there. But General Sullivan, the guy that had just returned to Washington, and General Greene organized their men in a way that allowed Washington and his main force to escape. And they're going to move off to the northwest a little bit. One other man that joined the group there was a young French military officer who had wanted to join George Washington, but the King of France said, no, we don't want to go to war with England yet, and told him, stay at home. And so this young officer, dressed up like a woman, got on a ship, because he was being watched by the king's men, got on a ship and got himself smuggled over to, I think, Georgia, and worked his way all the way up to Philadelphia to meet George Washington, and announces, I'm here, I want to be a general. And George Washington kind of chuckles and said, well, you're a fine fellow and all that, but you're a Frenchman, you're not an American, you can't be a general in our army. But come along with me. And he did, and at the Battle of Brandywine, when some of Washington's generals weren't doing so well, he's going to take charge of a small unit, just ad hoc. Nobody told him to do it. And he's going to be one of the people that slowed the British down enough so that George Washington and the main part of the army, the Continental Army, is able to escape. There was another guy, and I may have a picture of him somewhere in here, named Casimir Pulaski, who was a Polish guy that a fellow named Silas Deane had recruited to come and fight for the Americans. He organized the American cavalry. He built it from scratch. And he's also going to be involved in saving George Washington from being captured. So it was a really interesting job. A deal. There were a couple of American generals, there was a Frenchman, and there was a Polish guy, all got together to kind of save the day at Brandywine. Otherwise, the war might have been over. But the British are going to dominate. They're going to drive Washington back. Washington won't be able to defend Philadelphia, and the British will march in. Of course, they're not going to catch the Continental Congress, because when they heard the British were coming, they had their bags packed and they were gone. And they're going to dodge over to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and then I think they go to York, Pennsylvania after that. Wherever it's a little bit safer. But Howe occupies Philadelphia on the 26th of September, and then he makes kind of a strange decision. He was supposed to keep going north, but he decides, it's late in the year, I think I'll just stay here for a while. Meanwhile, General Burgoyne, there's General John Sullivan, by the way, the guy that was captured at Long Island. Oops. Pictures. Come on, machine. There's John Sullivan. After he retires from the military, he's going to be a federal judge. He'll also be the president of New Hampshire for a while, before we stopped using president in states. That's the equivalent of being the governor of New Hampshire. There goes John Burgoyne. He's going to go way up to the St. Lawrence River. Along with him, his second in command will be a brigadier general by the name of Simon Fraser. Facing him is a fairly small army under the command of a general named Horatio Gates. It started as a fairly small army. Now, Burgoyne's going to go down the Richelieu River, get onto Lake Champlain. About half of his force, a little bit more, is going down the lake on barges, all of his supplies and things like that. By the time he gets to the bayou, he's going to go very slowly. By the time he gets to the bottom of that lake and starts working his way down there, he's going to notice that he's having trouble collecting supplies from the local countryside. And the further he goes, the more resistance he makes. What he doesn't realize is that Americans from Vermont, New Hampshire, and all the areas up there are beginning to leave their homes and come down and join General Gates's army. So by the time they start really fighting seriously, the first battle will be in September, and the last battle will be in October. The Americans have about 30,000 men there. General Burgoyne has just over 6,000. General Burgoyne also, and I don't know if I have a map of this. Okay, there you go. He's going to send another general, or a colonel actually, named Barry St. Ledger, all the way down, or all the way upstream on the St. Lawrence, across Lake Ontario, and his mission is to go and recruit Canadians to fight on the side of the British, and recruit Indians to fight on the side of the British, and then join him in the vicinity of Saratoga, New York. But the Americans find out about it, and they dispatch Benedict Arnold to go out and stop him. You've got to remember, Benedict Arnold had attacked up in Quebec. He'd been wounded up there. He still has an unhealed hole in his leg. He marches his men. This is his second incredible march. He marches his men all the way from the area of Saratoga, all the way almost to the Great Lakes. He's going to have a fight at a fort called Fort Stanwix. He's going to bluff the people there, making his force sound like it's a bigger force, making a lot of noise and things like that. He fools the Indians. They take off. They decide they don't like Fort Stanwix very much, and they go somewhere else. He kind of fools some of the Canadians who weren't all that enthusiastic about fighting anyway. And Barry St. Ledger is forced to make a U-turn, go back up to Lake Ontario, and try and find his way to join Burgoyne some other way. Then Benedict Arnold turns his force around 180 degrees and marches overland all the way back to Saratoga. I suggest to you that even if you were driving a car in modern times, you'd find that kind of a long drive. This is a guy with a hole in one leg, and he made it all the way back, all the way out and all the way back. And he joins General Gates, and he's rewarded by being put under arrest because he has a disagreement with General Gates. Basically, I think he told General Gates, "You've got 30,000 men. Why don't you just go ahead and finish the job off?" And Gates is puffing and making plans and thinking about it and all of that. And the British strike first. And they fight one major battle in September, and they kind of recoil because they didn't win it out and out. And now General Burgoyne realizes that he's in a tough position, and he sends people trying to make their way all the way to New York to tell General Clinton he needs help. And by early in October, he realizes General Clinton's not going anywhere. And so he's going to have to fight his way out of this big encirclement. And on the 7th of October, he's going to launch an attack on what he thinks are the weakest part of the American lines. And it's called the Battle of Venus Heights. It's led by a general. Let's see if I've got his picture here. Where is he? There it is, by this guy, General Simon Fraser, who wasn't a bad leader. But he made the mistake of getting out in front of his men to urge them on. And Benedict Arnold, who's under arrest in his tent, he's one of those hyperactive people, can't stand it anymore and leaves his tent and tells the guard, "You know, what are you going to do, shoot me?" He joins Colonel Morgan, who's got a bunch of Virginia riflemen. They're armed with these new rifled weapons that fire accurately in a longer distance. And he notices General Fraser up there leading his men on a big black Charger. And he tells Colonel Morgan, "Have one of you guys shoot him." And Colonel Morgan, I think, was a little reluctant. You know, back in those days you didn't shoot generals, I guess. I don't know what the story was, but Benedict Arnold said, "The heck with all of that, shoot him." So they did. And they shot and mortally wounded General Fraser, and his attack fell apart. Then Benedict Arnold tries to encourage the American soldiers to attack while they're disorganized and nobody's going anywhere. So he steals somebody's horse and grabs a sword and rides out in front and starts swinging his sword around, yelling, "Attack, attack!" And the Americans launch an attack, which was initiated by Benedict Arnold. During the attack, by the way, the British are going to break and run, and they're going to go all the way back to where they started from. Benedict Arnold's horse is shot, and Benedict Arnold was shot, and the horse falls on him. And Arnold, I think, was quoted as saying, "Damn, it's the same leg again." And he'll never recover from it. I guess he lost some bone in that. He'll be able to walk again, but kind of out of kilter. One leg's shorter than the other one, and it's going to take him a long time to recover. Well, we got to talk about General Burgoyne. He realizes now that he can't break out of this encirclement, and so he surrenders. This is the first major surrender of any British force. It's about 6,000 men, roughly that. And instantly, General Gates, who really had very little to do with defeating him, even though he was the general in charge, sends a messenger. I was looking for a picture of General Gates here. Let's see if I can find it. Where is he? There he is, Horatio Gates. One of the American generals I love to hate. You notice I have brackets around the Battle of Trenton. It's one of the battles he fought in because he didn't do anything in it. he's going to send a colonel by the name of Wilkinson over to the Continental Congress saying, General Gates won the Battle of Saratoga. It's a great victory. And the Continental Congress is happy, and they promote the colonel that he sent to brigadier general. We'll talk about Wilkinson much later in this semester. He's a real lowlife. If you think Gates is a lowlife, General Wilkinson was even worse. Benedict Arnold doesn't get promoted or anything. And in fact, Congress hasn't paid him yet for the money, the personal money he spent to get to Quebec for that attack. They never do. And he becomes a very bitter man. Eventually, when he recovers from his wounds, George Washington's going to try and give him a decent job, and he's going to put him in charge of Philadelphia when the Americans get back into Philadelphia. We'll talk about that a little bit later. What's the significance of the surrender at Saratoga? The greatest significance, aside from being the first battle, really big battle that the Americans won, was the effect it had on the French. Now, two people are over in France. One's Benjamin Franklin, a really, really clever guy. And another one is a fellow named Silas Deane, that we don't hear much about in our little golden book of history. He's the guy that's over in France recruiting experienced officers to come fight in the American army. He's the guy that found Lafayette and encouraged him to go to America. He's the guy that found Casimir Pulaski, the cavalry guy from Poland. He sent him over. And he's going to find another guy that's really, really important by the name of von Steuben. We'll talk about him later. The French were willing to secretly give us a little bit of money to help us with the war. But the king did not want to go to war with England. So he refused to commit. Benjamin Franklin was trying to influence him all sorts of different ways. Clever man that he was. When news of the Battle of Saratoga reached France, Benjamin Franklin uses that as leverage. And finally the French say, well, it looks like they're going to win. Let's back the winning side. And they agree to they signed two treaties with us after the Battle of Saratoga. The first one is what you call a Treaty of Friendship and Trade. The other one, though, was more important. It was a military alliance. And they promised to send us troops, money, equipment, and give us naval support. We had no real navy. We had individual ships that were fighting. Famous Navy Captain John Paul Jones, called the father of the American Navy sometimes, but we had no navy to speak of. And the British used their navy up and down our coast to move troops back and forth and to keep people from bringing us supplies and things of that nature. This alliance is going to be crucial to us winning the war. And I'll show you an example of that towards the end. It's going to take a while. First, the French will send some troops over, but they're going to go up to Rhode Island that we recapture from the British, and they're going to spend a lot of time up there training. Meantime, Washington's going to be up there keeping the British bottled up in New York, but I'm getting ahead of myself because they're still in Philadelphia at the time we're talking about. When this is all over, there's the two significances. By the way, the people in England that were against the war, they're going to get noisier. But that alliance with France was the big thing. Okay, Howe is out. Clinton, his second command, takes over. What's the story there? Howe stayed in Philadelphia. And in England, of course they're not there, so they can't really see what's going on. Everyone blames Howe for this, what now looks like a stupid plan of Burgoyne coming down Lake Champlain and Clinton being in New York and Howe going through Philadelphia. And they find him at fault for Burgoyne's disaster. It wasn't even Howe's idea, but he was held responsible. It was Germain signing on with Burgoyne's idea that caused that trouble. So Howe quits. He resigns his commission, returns to England to argue before Parliament that it wasn't his fault, it was somebody else's, and nobody was listening. Later on, he'll still have a job in the army and all of that, but for the time being, he's out of favor, and Clinton takes over. So now you've got Henry Clinton in command. You've got a guy by the name of Cornwallis, who's a good general, second in command. And most of the British forces are either in Philadelphia or in New York. And they get orders from England. What are you doing in Philadelphia? There's nothing there. Get out of Philadelphia. Get back to New York so that you have the whole army together and get this war over with. And so General Clinton is going to have the job of moving the army out of Philadelphia. But by this time, it's winter, and they're not going anywhere until the snow melts and things get a little bit warmer. At the same time, about 20 miles or so, maybe 25 miles outside of Philadelphia, at a place where there was a big, as far as big goes back then, it's not big compared to now, there was a big butchery shop or a meat processing place there. And they're going to move into it, and of course we all call it Valley Forge. And the army didn't have much money, they didn't have supplies. They built what kind of shelters they could build, pretty crude. And this army that was about 15,000, 16,000 men strong begins to fade away. It's a really bad winter. And people are going home. It's a lot warmer to sleep with mama than it is to sleep in a tent in the snow. So, things look bad. Washington holds together the remnants. It gets down to about 2,000 men, maybe a little bit more. People are dying of diseases you get from being cold, starvation too, some of them. People are smuggling food to them from Philadelphia. Women would bring food down, come down to see their husbands if they were down there, whatever. And here comes this interesting other guy. I think I've got a picture of him, maybe not. But this bad experience at Valley Forge lasts from December of 1777 until June of 1778, when it really warms up and they leave the place. We'll talk about that. There's Germain. Some of the people that were shining stars at Valley Forge, one of them was Alexander Hamilton, who was kind of an orphan boy turned lawyer, turned patriot, who was attached to General Washington and became his kind of man Friday. He did everything for him. He ran his messages for him and everything. He's a lieutenant colonel. He really, really wants to be in charge of a regiment of men and be a leader, a fighting man, but Washington won't let him do that. I'm not sure if he was qualified or not, but he'll learn as he goes along. One of the other stars was Lafayette. And I think those two young men, Hamilton and Lafayette, taught Washington, you don't have any food, go get some. Taught him how to just go down and visit farms and walk away with food. That kept those few people that were still there alive. But there was one other very dynamic guy. Where is he? I'm looking for a picture of him. I thought I had him in here. Bear with me. Okay, I'm going to cheat. I know another place I got this picture. In Names and Faces, which you guys also have. So you can look him up if you want. There's Margaret Gage. Where is he? Come on. There he is. This is another guy that was recruited by Silas Deane. We don't really know much about his past. I mean, he told people, we don't know whether it was believable or not, but he seemed to know how to be a soldier. His name was Friedrich Wilhelm Ludolf Gerhard Augustin von Steuben. Got that remembered? That would be a good fill-in-the-blank question, wouldn't it? For anything. We'll just call him von Steuben. He arrived in America in 1777, right about the time George Washington went into Valley Forge. It's going to take him until May the next year to get there. He is going to go and volunteer his services. He can't speak English. He can curse in about 7 different languages. And apparently was reportedly a really good cursor. I think he could speak French. And so Lafayette was useful there. And he began to train this nucleus of the American army that was left over in the spring. And a funny thing started happening. As the weather got better, the army grew again. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew. Up to about 19,000 men. And von Steuben was very, very much responsible for then becoming a real army. And he taught about supply systems, and he taught about how you control an army and all of these things. Washington makes him his inspector general, puts him in charge of all the military organization, and eventually he'll just be Washington's chief of staff, virtually a second in command. They'll make him a major general. Congress will make him a major general at Washington's request. By the way, they also made Lafayette a major general at Washington's request. So when we get into May and June, we got an army. They survived the winter. They're back in operation. Now, General Clinton starts pulling the British Army out of Philadelphia. And it's going to be a big, long column, and they're all waving goodbye to the girls and all that. As they leave, there was one officer, a major by the name of John Andre, that had a really neat girlfriend in Philadelphia. We'll talk about her a little bit later. But anyway, they're marching away. Clinton leading the column, General Cornwallis with the rear guard. And the Americans start kind of following them at a safe distance, nipping at their heels if they send out patrols or whatever. Lafayette, Hamilton, Sullivan, they're all going to Washington. Let us attack them. Let us attack them. Washington saying, not until the time's right. And apparently the time became right as they were passing through New Jersey, about halfway back to New York. They're passing through a little town called Monmouth, New Jersey. And finally, the young men are able to convince Washington it might be a good time to attack their rear guard anyway, because they're a little bit separated from the main body of troops. Washington's second in command is a general by the name of Charles Lee. Charles Lee is a strange bird. He was in the British Army. I think he got kicked out of the British Army, but somewhere early in the war, he joins with the Americans. He was also captured by the British. He thought he was going to be hanged for being a turncoat, but they just treated him like a normal prisoner of war. British are really good at chatting people up, you know, being kind of friendly and getting you to talk. While he was there, he sat down and he wrote a plan, I guess to pass the time. Here's how to beat the American army. But eventually he's going to be traded. He's going to rejoin Washington. And he tells Washington, don't be stupid. It's a bad idea to attack the British. I won't have it. I know about military. I've been a military officer a lot longer than you have. You don't want to attack the British now. But the young generals, they convinced Washington to have a shot at it. Then Charles Lee totally flips and says, okay, I'm in charge of it. I'm second in command. I'm the senior man. I should be allowed to lead this attack. So he does lead the attack. And they attack. And apparently Cornwallis turns around and faces them. And things don't go well for Charles Lee and the boys. And the first Washington hears about it is someone comes galloping up to him saying, General, you've got to help. Our men are running. And Washington mounts up and rides out towards the front. And he sees in the distance a horse galloping in his direction really fast. And it's none other than General Charles Lee going, run, run, here come the British. And Washington tells him, turn around and fight. And Charles Lee says, you know, whatever he said, it was a negative sort of thing. And George Washington said, "You're fired, you're under arrest." And he put his young generals in charge of the remaining forces, rode forward, turned the retreat around, and they reattacked Cornwallis. It was getting late in the day. They fought right around the Monmouth courthouse. It was more or less a draw. At night, you know, both forces backed off from each other a little bit, built their campfires and things like that. In the darkness, why am I showing you all these people? I'm looking for Monmouth. Oh, I'm on the wrong set, that's why. Give me a break. There we go. There's the Battle of Monmouth. You got that chart memorized? Okay, you can draw it for me in the test. There's General Charles Lee, relieved of duty by Washington, court-martialed, kicked out of the Army. I think he'd been kicked out of the British Army too. So, not somebody you really needed. Now, we have to switch sides anyway because we ran out of slides. Here we go. This set of slides reviews some of those things. Here's what the British are going to do. Clinton is the commander now. Cornwallis is his second in command. And they are going to decide, nobody likes us up here, basically. Their understanding was in the South there were more loyalists than in the North. And so they come up with a new strategy. They're going to move a large part of their army out of New York. They made it back to New York. They're all together in New York. They're going to use the Navy, and they're going to attack southern cities on the ocean, and capture the major southern cities in the South. They're going to go inland in the South. They're going to recruit loyalists, and then they're going to attack Washington and company from the South. At the same time, and we got a couple of minutes so I can talk about it, we've reoccupied Philadelphia. Benedict Arnold's in charge. He meets a young woman who used to be the girlfriend of John Andre, and may still be. He marries her. He's a widower. He marries her. She introduces him to John Andre. He is angry with Congress because they won't pay him money they owe him. He's angry with Congress because they didn't promote him. Washington finally got him promoted to Major General. And he listens to what John Andre tells him, and he agrees to give him information in exchange for money and in exchange for a position in the British Army. They promised to make him a general in the British Army, and he switches sides. We had other people who were angry with Congress, but none of them switched sides like that. Charles Lee, I have always thought, was probably always working for the British Army. But at any rate, Benedict Arnold's going to change sides. He's going to end up down in Norfolk, Virginia area, and he's going to be in charge of a large group of loyalists down there. And he will figure in this new Southern strategy. Clinton and Cornwallis go south. The first place they capture is in 1778 is Savannah, Georgia. It's going to take them a couple of years. They're going to have a couple of bright young officers they're going to send inland to recruit for them. Hang on for a minute, I'm trying to make this easier to see. They're going to get control of a lot of areas in the South. The French are going to try in 1779 to help the Americans retake Savannah, but they're not going to succeed. We're going to lose that cavalry guy, Casimir Pulaski, who's leading a headlong charge on Savannah, and he gets killed. They're going to go inland, recruiting. By May of 1780, they have Charleston, South Carolina. They first landed there in 1776 briefly, but they were driven out. In Charleston, the only American general to be forced to surrender was a guy by the name of Benjamin Lee, not related to Charles Lee. No, not Benjamin Lee, Benjamin Lincoln. Lincoln had been a hero up at the Battle of Saratoga. He's forced to surrender because he's totally surrounded, not only by the British Army, but by the British fleet. And they're bombarding Charleston, and they're going to destroy the city. So he surrenders to save the city. Eventually, he will be exchanged for a British officer that we captured. Now Congress is going to have to meet this new threat in the South. By the way, General Clinton will go back up to New York. Cornwallis will be in charge of everything down south. There'll be some other senior officers there too. So they look around for a general to send down south to slow the British down. And politics get involved in this. Politics should never be involved in the military, and the military should never be involved in politics. And they pick the great hero of Saratoga, General Horatio Gates, who did very little to win the Battle of Saratoga. And they're going to send him south with a fairly large contingent of Continentals, trained soldiers, and militia, a lot of supplies and artillery. He's going to get all the way south to Camden, South Carolina, and General Cornwallis is going to attack him and destroy his force. In the last we see of General Horatio Gates, he's whipping his horse and running for Virginia. He left his soldiers behind. Some of the good ones managed to reform up in the hills. He lost his artillery, he lost his supplies, he lost everything. And that's almost the last we'll hear of him. We'll hear one more time from him. And it looks like, unless I'm wrong, we're out of time. So we'll talk about it more, but what's going to happen, I'll tell you just in preparation for next class. Washington's going to send his favorite, Nathaniel Greene, down there to take Horatio Gates' place. And Greene was going to be responsible for forcing Cornwallis to go up to Virginia. And that will eventually result in the end of the war, the Battle of Yorktown. By this time, our army has finally learned how to be an army. And some of the generals really know how to lead. But it took a while.
It's about time.
Yeah, it took a while. Americans didn't tend to like, and a lot of them don't like now, professional armies. Because they always feel that the armies will try and exercise their influence too much. But the fact of the matter is, nowadays there's no time to get organized and do what we did during the American Revolution. We have to be ready at the beginning, not later on, because later on may come tomorrow. That's the big difference. Okay, see you next time. We'll finish this war off and talk about the exam a little bit next class.
Professor Hunt, is
Yes, ma'am.
there supposed to be a Unit 5 quiz this week and stuff?
Like a Unit 5 quiz? No. There's supposed to be a whole lot of studying to get ready for the exam next week. We'll talk about that more on Friday. But no Unit 5. I put a little thing in there to test the respondent system. Read about that and see if you can do it. If you can't do it, we may not be able to use it, but I'm trying really hard to be able to use it. Any other questions before I turn this machine off? I gripe so much about them turning it off early that now they're leaving it on late. Sales Center's looking
Your
hungry.
conference is
Time to
scheduled
get
to
going.
end in 2 minutes.
See you next time.
Your conference is now over. Goodbye.